My brother took my $20K loan, then ghosted me at his engagement. 3 months ago, I watched my brother walk out of the bank with $20,000 of my money burning a hole in his pocket. The loan officer had been so impressed with my credit score and steady income that the approval came through in 2 days. I remember the exact moment he turned to me in the parking lot, his eyes bright with relief, promising he'd pay me back within 6 months once his business got off the ground. We shook hands like we used to when we were kids making deals over Pokemon cards. I should have known better. The whole thing started when he called me at 2 in the morning, voice cracking through the phone about how his startup was hemorrhaging money and he needed an emergency injection of cash or everything would collapse. He painted this picture of investors pulling out last minute, of employees depending on him, of dreams crumbling. I sat there in my boxers, listening to my little brother sob about losing everything he'd worked for. The same brother who used to build blanket forts with me and split his Halloween candy when I ate mine too fast. What kind of person would I be if I didn't help him? I spent the next week researching business loans, calling different banks, comparing interest rates. My girlfriend kept telling me it was a bad idea, that family and money never mix well, but I brushed off her concerns. She didn't understand the bond my brother and I had. We'd been through everything together, our parents' messy divorce, moving between apartments every few months, eating ramen for dinner more nights than I care to remember. He was the only family I had left that mattered. The paperwork was straightforward enough. I put my name on everything, took full responsibility for the debt, and watched as $20,000 transferred from the bank's account to his. He was practically bouncing with excitement, talking about how this would change everything, how he'd finally prove to everyone that he could make it on his own. We went out for drinks afterwards, and he insisted on paying for the first round. I should have made him pay for all of them. For the first month, everything seemed fine. He'd send me updates about meetings with potential clients, photos of his tiny office space, screenshots of his growing social media following. His messages were full of energy and optimism, the kind that made me believe I'd made the right choice. He even invited me to a company happy hour where I met his business partner and a few employees. Everyone seemed so young and motivated, talking about changing the world through their app or service or whatever it was they were building. But then the updates started getting shorter and less frequent. Instead of detailed reports about progress and milestones, I'd get brief texts saying things were going well or that he was busy with important meetings. When I'd ask specific questions about timelines or repayment schedules, he'd deflect with jokes or change the subject entirely. The pit in my stomach started growing, but I kept telling myself that startups were stressful and unpredictable. Maybe he was just overwhelmed. The second month brought more red flags than a communist parade. His social media posts shifted from business updates to photos of expensive dinners and weekend trips. I watched him check into restaurants I couldn't afford on my salary, posting pictures of steaks and cocktails with captions about celebrating small victories. When I casually asked about these celebrations, he got defensive and said that networking was essential for business growth. Part of me wanted to believe him, but another part was starting to feel like a complete idiot. My girlfriend wasn't shy about pointing out the obvious. She'd scroll through his Instagram while we watched Netflix, showing me photos of him at some rooftop bar or sporting event, asking how someone who supposedly needed an emergency loan could afford such an expensive lifestyle. I'd make excuses, saying that maybe clients were picking up the tab or that he was using reward points or credit card promotions. Deep down, I knew she was right, but admitting it would mean facing the reality that my brother was using me. The third month was when communication practically stopped altogether. My texts would go unanswered for days, and when he finally responded, it was always with some vague excuse about being swamped with work or dealing with complicated client negotiations. I started driving by his office building during lunch breaks, just to see if his car was in the parking garage. Half the time it wasn't there, and when it was, the lights in his office were off. I felt like a stalker, but I needed to know what was really going on. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was his business partner, someone I'd met briefly at that happy hour months earlier. His voice was tense and uncomfortable as he explained that the company had folded 2 weeks ago, that my brother had stopped coming to work, and that several employees hadn't been paid for their final month. The partner thought I should know since I was family, and he figured my brother would have told me already. I sat in my car outside a grocery store, listening to this stranger explain how my brother had essentially abandoned his responsibilities and disappeared. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not just the money, though that was devastating enough, but the lies and manipulation. All those months of fake updates and fabricated progress reports, while he was probably spending my $20,000 on God knows what. I tried calling him immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent angry texts demanding explanations, but they remained unread. It was like he'd vanished from the face of the earth. My girlfriend found me that night sitting on the bathroom floor, staring at my phone and refreshing his social media accounts obsessively. She sat down next to me without saying anything, just held my hand while I tried to process what had happened. The financial hit was bad enough. $20,000 represented months of saving and careful budgeting, but the emotional damage felt even worse. My brother, the person I'd trusted more than anyone, had looked me in the eye and systematically lied to me while spending my money. I spent the next few days in a weird fog, going through the motions of work and daily life while my brain kept spinning through the same questions. How long had he been planning this? Were there any moments of genuine remorse or guilt? Did he ever intend to pay me back, or was this always just an elaborate con job? The worst part was not knowing if this was a moment of desperation that got out of hand, or a calculated decision to screw over his own brother. My mom called during this time, excited to tell me about my brother's engagement announcement that had apparently been posted on social media. She was gushing about how happy he looked, how beautiful his fiancée seemed, how proud she was that both her sons were doing so well. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what had really happened. The words just wouldn't come out. Instead, I made polite noises and hung up as quickly as possible. That's when I saw the Instagram post myself. There he was, grinning like he'd won the lottery, down on one knee in front of some fancy restaurant with a ring that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The caption was full of heart emojis and romantic nonsense about finding his soulmate and starting the next chapter of his life. I stared at that photo for probably 10 minutes, studying every detail, trying to understand how someone could propose to their girlfriend using money they'd stolen from their brother. The engagement party invitation arrived in my mailbox 3 weeks later, delivered by regular mail like nothing had happened. It was one of those expensive cardstock invitations with fancy lettering and multiple inserts explaining the venue, dress code, and gift registry. The return address was his apartment, the same place I'd been texting and calling without any response. Seeing my name written in his handwriting on the envelope felt surreal, like receiving a letter from a ghost. I showed the invitation to my girlfriend, and she immediately started researching the venue online. It was some upscale event space downtown, the kind of place that charges hundreds of dollars per person just for the privilege of eating rubber chicken in a room with dim lighting and overpriced flowers. She pulled up reviews and pricing information, calculating that the party would probably cost more than the entire loan amount. The irony was almost too much to handle. Part of me wanted to just ignore the invitation and pretend it never happened, but another part was curious about what would happen if I actually showed up. Would he acknowledge me? Would he pretend everything was normal? Would he have the nerve to introduce me to his fiancée and her family as his loving brother? The thought of confronting him in public was both terrifying and appealing. My girlfriend suggested I should go, not to cause a scene but to get some kind of closure. She pointed out that avoiding him forever wasn't really an option since we were still family, and that maybe seeing him face to face would help me understand what had happened. I wasn't sure I wanted to understand, but I knew she was right about needing some kind of resolution. The week leading up to the party was torture. I kept changing my mind about whether to attend, trying on different outfits, practicing conversations in my head. I'd rehearse what I would say if he approached me, how I'd handle questions from relatives who didn't know about the loan situation. My girlfriend helped me brainstorm different scenarios, but nothing felt quite right. How do you prepare for confronting someone who's betrayed you so completely? The night of the party, I stood outside the venue for 15 minutes, watching other guests arrive through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Everyone looked so happy and elegant, holding cocktails and chatting animatedly about the happy couple. I could see my brother across the room, wearing an expensive suit I'd never seen before, laughing with a group of his fiancée's friends. He looked completely relaxed, like he didn't have a care in the world. I finally worked up the courage to go inside, and the first person I ran into was my cousin, someone I hadn't seen in years. She immediately started gushing about how successful my brother had become, how impressive his business was, how proud the whole family should be. I nodded and smiled, feeling like I was participating in some kind of elaborate fiction. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Here was this celebration of my brother's happiness, funded by money he'd stolen from me. The venue was even more impressive inside than it had looked from the street. There were probably 200 people there, all dressed in their finest clothes, eating expensive appetizers and drinking top-shelf liquor. I grabbed a beer from the bar and tried to blend into the crowd, observing the scene while working up the courage to approach my brother. Every time I started walking in his direction, someone would intercept me with small talk or questions about my life. About an hour into the party, I finally caught his eye from across the room. For just a moment, his confident smile faltered, and I saw something that might have been guilt or fear flash across his face. But then he quickly looked away and started an animated conversation with someone else, as if I wasn't even there. The deliberate snub felt like another punch to the gut. I spent the next hour watching him carefully, noting how he moved through the crowd, how he avoided the sections of the room where I was standing. It was like an elaborate dance, with him always managing to be engaged with other people whenever I got close. His fiancée seemed lovely, gracious, and warm with everyone she met, completely unaware that her engagement ring had been purchased with stolen money. Then came the moment I'd been dreading. The best man called for everyone's attention, and my brother stepped up to the microphone to give a speech about love and commitment and building a future together. He talked about how grateful he was for the support of his family and friends, how he couldn't have achieved his dreams without the people who believed in him. The hypocrisy was staggering. I found myself clenching my fists, fighting the urge to stand up and tell everyone exactly how he'd achieved his dreams. But I didn't. I just stood there, listening to him paint himself as this grateful, humble guy who'd worked hard for everything he had. He even mentioned me by name, thanking his big brother for always being there for him through thick and thin. The crowd turned to look at me, expecting me to smile and wave, and somehow I managed to do exactly that. The applause felt like mockery. After the speech, I knew I had to leave. I couldn't stand there pretending everything was normal while he celebrated his engagement with my money. I was heading toward the exit when his fiancée intercepted me, her face bright with genuine warmth and excitement. She thanked me for coming, said she'd heard so many wonderful things about me, and how she was looking forward to getting to know me better as part of the family. Standing there, looking at this sweet woman who had no idea what kind of person she was about to marry, I felt a moment of clarity. She deserved to know the truth, not necessarily right now at her engagement party, but eventually. Someone who would steal from family and lie so easily wasn't going to be a faithful partner. But telling her would also mean destroying her happiness and potentially ruining her life. I made some polite excuse about having to leave early and headed for the door. As I was walking through the parking lot, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and there he was, still in his expensive suit, finally ready to face me after months of avoidance. For a moment, we just stared at each other in the dim light of the parking lot. Two brothers who used to share everything now separated by $20,000 and a mountain of broken trust. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain where the money had gone or when he planned to pay it back. Instead, he asked me not to ruin his engagement party, as if I was the one who'd done something wrong. He said he understood I was angry, but that we could work everything out later after the wedding when things settled down. The casual dismissal of what he'd done, the assumption that I would just wait quietly while he enjoyed his celebration, was the final straw. I told him exactly what I thought of him, not shouting or causing a scene, but speaking clearly and firmly about what his actions had cost me. Not just financially, but emotionally. I explained how his lies had made me question my own judgment, how his betrayal had damaged my ability to trust anyone. I told him that the money wasn't just numbers on a bank statement. It represented months of my life, sacrifices I'd made, dreams I'd put on hold to help him pursue his. He listened with this blank expression, like I was talking about someone else's problems. When I finished, he just shrugged and said that business was risky, that these things happened, that I should have known better than to expect guarantees. The complete lack of remorse or accountability was breathtaking. This wasn't my little brother anymore, this was a stranger wearing his face. I walked away from that parking lot knowing I'd never get my money back, and more importantly, that I'd never get my brother back either. The person I'd grown up with, shared secrets with, protected and supported through every challenge. That person was gone, replaced by someone who could steal from family and sleep peacefully at night. The loan was just money, but losing my brother was a wound that would never fully heal. The next morning, I started the process of reporting the loan default to the credit agencies and began making arrangements to handle the debt payments myself. $20,000 would take me years to pay off, but at least I'd be doing it with my eyes open, without any illusions about family loyalty or brotherly love. Some lessons are expensive, but they're worth learning if they prevent you from making the same mistake twice. 6 months later, I heard through my mother that his marriage had fallen apart before the wedding even happened. Apparently, his fiancée had discovered some financial irregularities that made her question everything about their relationship. I never found out if she learned about the loan specifically, but I wasn't surprised that someone with his moral flexibility had other secrets worth hiding. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt sad for everyone involved. The last I heard, he'd moved across the country and was supposedly starting over with a new career and a clean slate. My mother keeps hoping we'll reconcile someday, that family bonds will eventually overcome whatever disagreement we've had. She doesn't know the full story, and I've never had the heart to tell her that her younger son is a thief who stole from his own brother. Some truths are too painful to share, even when keeping them secret means carrying the burden alone. I've learned to live with the debt payments, budgeting carefully and finding ways to make the money stretch. More importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts when people ask for help, to set boundaries that protect both my finances and my emotional well-being. The $20,000 taught me that blood doesn't automatically equal loyalty, and that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones you never expected to betray you. My girlfriend and I are still together, stronger than ever after weathering this crisis. She never once said I told you so, even though she'd seen the warning signs from the beginning. Instead, she helped me process the anger and disappointment, reminding me that my brother's choices reflected his character, not mine. The experience taught me that real family isn't about shared genetics. It's about the people who stand by you when everything falls apart. Looking back, I realized that the loan was never really about the money. It was about testing the limits of familial obligation, about discovering what people will do when they think they can get away with it. My brother saw an opportunity to solve his problems at my expense, and he took it without hesitation. The fact that it destroyed our relationship was apparently an acceptable cost for him, even if it wasn't for me. I still think about him sometimes, wondering if he ever feels guilty about what he did or if he's convinced himself that he was justified somehow. I wonder if he tells his new friends and colleagues about his family, or if he's learned to compartmentalize his past mistakes. But mostly, I try not to wonder at all, focusing instead on the relationships that actually matter, the people who have earned my trust through their actions rather than demanding it through their proximity. The debt will be paid off eventually, probably in about 3 more years if I stick to my current payment plan. When that final payment goes through, I'll have bought myself an expensive but valuable lesson about human nature, family dynamics, and the price of misplaced trust. $20,000 to learn that some people will take everything you offer and still ask for more in retrospect. It might have been worth every penny.